Never forget this. Checkmate is not the end of the game. It's the moment the world realizes you are playing 10 moves ahead. Think about it. In a real chess match, over 70% of losses happen because the opponent underestimated a single quiet move. Not the flashy sacrifice, not the dramatic strike, but that one subtle decision nobody saw coming. And isn't that exactly how the chosen ones move? While everyone was busy gossiping about your downfall, you were quietly setting up the board. And when you finally shifted that last piece, boom, game over. What makes it even funnier, they were so sure they were teaching you how to play, only to realize they were just free entertainment in your highlight reel. They thought they were the hunters, but really, they were just pawns dancing in your endgame strategy. So today, we're diving into why everyone is talking about how you checkmated them with style, and why this victory of yours cannot be undone. This isn't just about winning, it's about redefining what the game even was. Number one, you didn't just outsmart them, you outlived their blueprint. You didn't just outsmart them, you outlived their blueprint. That's the kind of victory that leaves scars on the people who swore they had you figured out. They drew up plans with your name written in the margins, convinced they could dictate your beginning, middle, and end. They wanted to script your downfall the way an architect sketches a building. But here's the flaw. Blueprints are only useful if the structure obeys. You didn't. You refused to be built to their measurements, and that refusal alone cracked their entire foundation. See, outsmarting someone can sting their pride, but outliving their expectations, that breaks them. Outsmarting is about a single move, a clever trick, or a quick reversal. Outliving is about endurance, persistence, and proving that time itself sides with you. They tried to box you in with deadlines, limits, and ceilings, but you didn't collapse under the weight. They did. Every time you kept standing when they counted you out, you tore another page from their manual. That's why your existence feels so offensive to them. You're proof that their calculations were not only wrong, but useless. And here's the brutal truth. Most people can't handle being wrong about someone's destiny. It unsettles them because it means all their effort to control, diminish, or erase was wasted. They thought your story would fold neatly into their narrative of superiority. Instead, you became living evidence that the game they designed was too small to contain you. Outsmarting them would have been enough to win the round. Outliving their blueprint means you've already won the war. What makes this victory so sharp is that it doesn't even require your constant aggression. You didn't need to tear their blueprint to pieces. You just had to keep moving, keep breathing, keep being. The longer you existed outside of their design, the weaker their structure became. They thought the checkmate would come from their clever move, but the real checkmate was simply your refusal to die in the cage they built. So when people talk about your style, it's not just about a flashy win, it's about how gracefully you proved them all wrong. Outsmarting is temporary. Outliving, that's permanent. That's why they can't undo it. Number two, they wanted you cornered, but you built a kingdom from the corner. They wanted you cornered, but you built a kingdom from the corner. That's the part they can't explain, the part that keeps them awake. Corners are supposed to suffocate. They're meant to shrink your options, limit your vision, and force you into desperation. When people try to back you into one, it's because they assume you'll panic, lash out recklessly, or give up entirely. But you didn't. You stood in the space they thought would kill you, and instead of begging for escape, you started building. The corner became your workshop. You learned how to work with what you had instead of complaining about what you didn't. You mastered the art of resourcefulness, turning scraps into weapons and restrictions into strategy. While they were busy spreading their influence in wide-open spaces, you were refining your craft in tight quarters where every move mattered. And when the walls pressed in instead of collapsing, you used them as structure, something to lean on, something to climb, something to turn into fortification. That's how the corner stopped being your weakness and transformed into your throne room. What unsettles them most is that your strength didn't come from abundance, it came from lack. They had all the freedom, all the room to move, all the resources they wanted, and still managed to waste it. You, on the other hand, had almost nothing, yet created something undeniable. That's the secret of real power, not how well you perform when everything is in your favor, but how unstoppable you become when everything is against you. The kingdom you built wasn't just for survival, it was for legacy. People now look at the place where you were supposed to break and see proof of your resilience. The corner became your crown because it was there that you stopped playing by their map and drew your own. And the irony? The same people who tried to shove you there now can't step into your territory without bowing to what you created. That's why this victory cannot be undone. They thought the corner would erase you, but it did the opposite. It made you unforgettable. The kingdom you built out of confinement is the evidence that limitations can't stop a chosen one. They only expose what was inside all along. Number 3, they played for applause, you played for permanence. They played for applause, you played for permanence. That single difference is what separated you from them from the very beginning. They chased noise while you chased time. They were addicted to quick recognition, the kind of validation that fades as soon as the clapping stops. But you were never after the moment. You were after the mark, the impact that lingers when the lights go out and the crowd moves on. Applause is cheap. It can be bought, manipulated, or faked. People will clap for a performance they don't even believe in just to feel like part of the moment. That's the trap your enemies lived in. They thought the crowd's reaction was proof of their greatness. But what they never understood is that applause doesn't equal respect. It doesn't equal influence. And it definitely doesn't equal permanence. It's just noise, loud for a second, then gone. You, on the other hand, were patient enough to forfeit the shallow reward. You didn't need the room to cheer for you because you were busy laying stones that would outlast them all. While they were obsessed with trending, you were focused on becoming timeless. And that's the difference between a performance and a legacy. Performances end, legacies expand. One feeds the ego, the other feeds generations. This is why, even now, people are still talking about how you checkmated them with style. Because what you did wasn't about the flash, it was about the foundation. You weren't trying to look good for the cameras, you were building something that wouldn't collapse after the credits rolled. And the proof is in the aftermath. Their names, their noise, their so-called victories fade quickly because they were never rooted in anything solid. Yours stays because permanence isn't built on noise. It's built on truth, discipline, and vision. That's why they can't undo what you've done. They can erase applause. It disappears on its own. But permanence? That doesn't go anywhere. They spent their lives trying to be remembered for a moment, while you ensured you would be remembered for an era. They wanted claps. You built echoes. And echoes don't die. They carry on long after the hands have stopped moving. That is what makes your victory unshakable. Number 4, you weren't playing chess, you were rewriting the board. They thought you were just another piece on the board, moving within the boundaries they understood. In their minds, you were stuck playing by the same rules they memorized, the same tired strategies passed down from people who thought control was the same as wisdom. But here's the truth that shattered them. You were never interested in winning their game. You were creating a new one altogether. While they obsessed over checkmates, pawns, and predictable moves, you were busy redrawing the board itself. That's what unnerved them. They couldn't recognize your steps because your steps weren't in their manual. They were prepared for opponents who would fight them on their terms. But you didn't fight on their terms. You flipped the entire concept of the match. Instead of playing for pieces, you played for principles. Instead of worrying about being boxed in, you removed the box, and in doing so you made every one of their carefully rehearsed moves useless. This is why they couldn't stop you. Strategy can only work if both sides agree on the same rules, but you tore the rules apart and built something different. They came with checklists and counters, but how do you counter someone who isn't even sitting at the same table anymore? Every time they thought they'd cornered you, they realized the corner no longer existed. Every time they thought they were ahead, they discovered they weren't even in the real game. And the brilliance of it all is that you didn't just rewrite the board for yourself. You rewrote it for everyone watching. You revealed that power isn't about playing better within their system. It's about realizing you can build your own system entirely. You showed that true mastery doesn't come from memorizing moves, but from reshaping the entire space where the moves happen. That's why your checkmate hit so hard. It wasn't that you simply won. It was that they had no idea what you were actually playing until it was too late. They were celebrating their small victories in a game that had already expired. Meanwhile, you had already set the stage for a new era, one they couldn't enter because they never imagined it could exist. And that's why this kind of win is permanent. They can't undo it because you didn't just win, you changed the board forever. Number 5. Every attack only expanded your territory. Every attack only expanded your territory. That's the paradox that breaks them. The harder they tried to crush you, the bigger you became. They assumed that striking you down would shrink your presence, silence your influence, and keep you small enough to manage. But each attack, instead of reducing you, pushed you into new spaces, opened new doors, and gave you new weapons. Their hostility wasn't your undoing, it was your expansion plan in disguise. This is the part they can't stand. They thought pain would make you fold, but pain became your proof. Every wound taught you how to endure, every betrayal gave you sharper vision, every loss carved out capacity in you that abundance never could. Resilience wasn't something you found in comfort, it was something forged in fire. And the more they turned up the heat, the stronger and wider your reach became. What they thought would end you trained you. What they thought would bury you rooted you deeper. That's why you turned blows into blueprints. Instead of crying over what was taken, you studied what remained and built with it. You didn't waste energy on revenge. You reinvested it into growth. They were obsessed with destroying you, but their obsession handed you free lessons in strategy, survival, and transformation. They became unwilling teachers. And without knowing it, every strike they launched became another instruction manual for your rise. Your territory didn't just expand in the physical sense, it grew in respect, in influence, and in authority. People watched how you handled attacks and realized your strength wasn't fake, it was proven. That's the kind of expansion no enemy can take back. They can erase applause, they can smear your name, but they can't erase the fact that every attempt to wound you only built a bigger platform for your resilience to stand on. This is why your victory is untouchable. You flipped the script so thoroughly that attacks no longer functioned as attacks. They became construction tools. And when resilience turns blows into blueprints, defeat isn't even possible. The harder they hit, the faster you built. The more they tried to erase you, the more permanent your presence became. What was meant to confine you became the evidence that you were unstoppable. Number 6, they thought silence would erase you, but it only amplified your frequency. They thought silence would erase you, but it only amplified your frequency. That's the miscalculation they'll never recover from. They assumed that if they starved you of attention, ignored your name, or shut down your voice, you'd disappear. In their minds, silence was a weapon, a way to suffocate your presence until you faded into nothing. But what they didn't understand is that silence doesn't kill someone who was never dependent on noise to begin with. It does the opposite. It makes their presence unavoidable because absence doesn't erase power, it magnifies it. Your silence wasn't a void, it was resonance. The kind of resonance that lingers like an echo long after the original sound has faded. While they filled the air with chatter, slander, and distractions, your quiet became sharper than their words. People began noticing the gap you left, and in that gap they started to feel your weight even more. That's the irony. By trying to mute you, they made people more aware of you. They turned you into the unanswered question everyone wanted resolved. Noise has a short shelf life. It comes and goes in waves, but resonance, that lasts. It travels, it grows, it carries itself into spaces you don't even step into. Your absence became a message in itself, one they couldn't control or counter. Instead of weakening your presence, silence expanded it. It made people wonder why your voice was missing, why your energy was absent, and why your light wasn't dimming despite the attempts to bury it. And each of those questions became proof that your influence had surpassed their reach. This is why your frequency is louder than theirs will ever be. Their noise depended on constant effort, shouting, convincing, manipulating. Yours didn't. You didn't need to fight to be heard. You simply had to exist, and even in quietness, the impact rippled outward. The absence became its own form of presence, untouchable and undeniable. That's why they can't undo what's been done. They thought silence was a grave, but for you it was an amplifier. It didn't erase your name, it carved it deeper into memory. While their noise faded with the moment, your frequency still hums through every space you touched, louder than words could ever carry. Number 7. You proved that checkmate is not about ending the game. It's about owning the story. You proved that checkmate is not about ending the game, it's about owning the story. That's the part most people never understand. They think victory is just about being the last one standing, about declaring the end. But the real weight of a win isn't in the finish, it's in the framing. Whoever controls the story controls the legacy. And you didn't just play to win. You played to ensure that when people retell the battle, they would have no choice but to see it through your lens. Your enemies wanted a story where you were the fool, the failure, the one who couldn't survive without their mercy. They were already writing the narrative before the game was even finished, confident that the ending was theirs to dictate. But when you made your move, it wasn't just about securing victory. It was about seizing authorship. You stripped the pen from their hands and wrote an ending they could neither rewrite nor escape. That's the true checkmate, when your win is not only undeniable, but unforgettable. History rarely remembers the noise of the losing side. It remembers the clarity of the one who claimed the moment. You understood this instinctively. While they were chasing quick wins and empty applause, you were thinking long-term, knowing that victory without ownership of the story is hollow. You didn't just want to beat them, you wanted the narrative itself to testify that you were never the underdog, never the pawn, never the one who lost control, and that's exactly what you achieved. Now, every time the story is told, it's not about their attempts, their schemes, or their temporary highs. It's about how you turned the board upside down, how you shifted the entire momentum, and how their so-called strategies ended up being nothing but footnotes in your chapter. You didn't just secure a win, you defined what the win meant, and that definition is permanent. That's why they can't undo this. Losing the game stings, but losing the story, that's devastation. You hold the narrative, and with it, you hold power far beyond the final move. Checkmate wasn't your ending. It was your signature, stamped boldly on the pages of history they once thought belonged to them. Now the story is yours forever. Number 8, they mistook your patience for passivity, and that miscalculation destroyed them. They mistook your patience for passivity, and that miscalculation destroyed them. To them, waiting looked like weakness. They thought your silence meant surrender, your stillness meant stagnation, and your restraint meant you had no answers. What they didn't realize is that patience isn't the absence of action. It's the mastery of timing. You weren't standing still because you had no moves left. You were standing still because you understood the power of letting them exhaust themselves first. That's the difference between the impulsive and the strategic. Impulsive people rush to prove a point. Strategic people wait to own the outcome. They assumed that your refusal to strike early meant you had no strike at all, and so they laughed, they bragged, they built castles of arrogance on shaky foundations. All the while you were studying their habits, learning their weaknesses and tracking their blind spots. You weren't asleep, you were storing energy, and when you finally moved, it wasn't a reaction, it was a conclusion. The most dangerous move in any battle is the one that feels inevitable, the one that erases all possibilities of recovery. That's what your patience produced. You didn't just counter their attacks, you positioned yourself so precisely that when you chose to act, the result couldn't be undone. They had time to anticipate 1,000 little moves, but they weren't ready for one decisive strike that closed every door at once. That's why it felt irreversible, because it was. Their downfall wasn't caused by your aggression, but by their own misinterpretation. They wasted their energy mocking what they thought was passivity instead of preparing for what patience was quietly building. By the time they realized you weren't stagnant but strategic, the board had already shifted and there was no way back. That's why your win carries so much weight. It wasn't just about what you did, it was about how long you were willing to wait before doing it. Patience gave you precision. Precision gave you permanence. And permanence is the kind of victory they can't rewrite, erase, or recover from. They thought you were frozen, but in truth, you were calculating. And once you moved, their entire game was over. Number 9, you showed that strategy is more ruthless than strength. You showed that strategy is more ruthless than strength. Strength alone is impressive for a moment, but it burns out fast. It demands constant display, constant proving, constant noise. That's why your enemies leaned so heavily on it. They thought sheer force, intimidation, or numbers would guarantee their victory. They believed if they just pushed hard enough, you'd collapse under the weight. But strength without intelligence is just noise dressed as power, and you exposed that truth in the most brutal way possible. While they wasted their energy swinging wildly, you were patient enough to study their patterns. You saw how predictable their moves were, how sloppy their confidence made them, how careless they became when they thought their strength was enough. Instead of matching their force, you dismantled it piece by piece with precision. You didn't need to fight harder, you fought smarter. Every strike you made was deliberate, calculated, and final. Where they spent 10 blows trying to make a dent, you made one move that unraveled everything. That's why strategy is ruthless. It doesn't just win, it humiliates. Strength wants applause. Strategy doesn't care about applause. It only cares about outcomes. Strategy is patient enough to let strength exhaust itself, and then it walks in to claim everything with half the effort. You didn't just beat them. You proved how foolish it is to rely only on muscle when the mind is sharper. And nothing stings an enemy more than realizing they lost not because you were stronger, but because you were smarter. The victory you claimed is permanent because strength fades, but strategy compounds. Their power has an expiration date. Your wisdom doesn't. They'll grow weaker over time, but your ability to outthink will only sharpen. That's why they can't undo what's already happened. They brought all their force to the table, but you brought the one weapon they couldn't measure or outlast: strategy. And in the end, that's what breaks them most. They can accept losing to someone stronger. It feels fair, it feels explainable. But losing to someone who simply outthought them, that lingers like a scar. They wasted their power, and you made every ounce of yours count. That's why your checkmate wasn't just a win. It was a lesson they'll never forget. Number 10. You were the variable they couldn't program. You were the variable they couldn't program. Everything about their system was designed to run smoothly, to predict outcomes, to lock people into roles where nothing unexpected could occur. They built structures, rules, and routines like a code, convinced they had eliminated every possibility of surprise. To them, life was a controlled formula, and everyone was just a predictable equation. But then you appeared. And suddenly their math stopped working, the numbers didn't add up anymore, the code broke and the system glitched. You were the error they couldn't debug, the factor they never accounted for. That's the danger of building life around control. You start believing destiny can be coded, that outcomes can be contained by human logic. They thought their strategies, lies, and manipulations were foolproof, airtight, unstoppable. And in fairness, it worked on everyone else. People bent, people broke, people gave in to the system because they were expected to. But you weren't built to fit in their equations. You were the variable that refused to be solved, the one number that destabilized the entire formula. Your presence proved that destiny doesn't obey human algorithms. You can't program purpose. You can't calculate divine timing. You can't script the rise of someone who was born to disrupt the pattern. That's why your very existence rattled them. It wasn't just your actions, it was the fact that no matter what they tried, they couldn't predict, contain, or erase you. Every attempt to control you only exposed how powerless their system really was. And this is where their downfall came from, not your aggression, but their obsession with trying to solve what was unsolvable. They wasted time and energy trying to reprogram you into something manageable, something that fit their script. But the more they tried, the more their system collapsed under the weight of your unpredictability. You weren't just outside their rules, you were proof that the rules themselves were broken. That's why your victory cannot be undone. They built their entire world on the illusion of control, and you shattered it simply by existing. They thought they were playing chess, but you weren't even on the board. They just didn't realize it until their carefully crafted algorithm crashed. You didn't fit their system because you were never meant to. You were meant to reveal it for what it really was: limited, fragile, and powerless against destiny. Number 11. They learned too late that exposure is more brutal than revenge. They learned too late that exposure is more brutal than revenge. Revenge is loud, obvious, and temporary. It gives people the satisfaction of seeing someone fall, but it rarely lasts. Exposure, though, is different. Exposure is quiet at first, then undeniable. It doesn't just take someone down, it dismantles the very image they worked so hard to build. And that's exactly what happened to them. You didn't waste your time trying to strike back because you understood something deeper. Truth has sharper teeth than retaliation ever could. They thought the only way you could answer them was by fighting on their level, screaming, plotting, or trying to tear them down. But you didn't need to. You knew all you had to do was stand, endure, and let their actions betray them. Eventually the mask slipped. It always does. And when it did, the world saw what you already knew. Their power was an illusion, their reputation was borrowed, their character was rotten. That kind of exposure is permanent. People may forgive mistakes, but they don't forget hypocrisy when it's laid bare. The beauty of exposure is that it flips the script. Instead of you being painted as the bitter one seeking revenge, they end up revealing themselves as the fraud. Every move they made to discredit you became a mirror exposing them. Every lie they told became evidence against them. In the end, they destroyed their own credibility without you lifting a finger. And that's far more devastating than anything you could have done with revenge. This is why your checkmate stands out. You didn't have to drag them into the mud. You let time, truth, and their own actions do the dragging for you. And while revenge burns out quickly, exposure leaves a scar. It rewrites how people see them forever. The empire they built on perception crumbled because once the truth was visible, no one could unsee it. That's the kind of win they can never undo. They thought they were fighting an opponent, but really they were fighting themselves, and the truth just lit the battlefield. You didn't destroy them, the truth did. And the truth doesn't need applause, it doesn't need theatrics, it just needs time. When it arrives, it hits harder than revenge ever could. Number 12. Their win condition was your defeat, yours was simply to exist. Their win condition was your defeat, yours was simply to exist. That's the imbalance they never saw coming. Their entire sense of power depended on you falling. Every scheme, every lie, every attempt to corner you had one goal: to erase you. To them, victory wasn't about growth, it wasn't about creating something real, it was about making sure you didn't survive the storm. Their whole game was fragile because it wasn't built on their own strength, but on the hope of your weakness. But your condition for victory was different. You didn't need to destroy them, you didn't need to outshine them, and you didn't even need to match their noise. All you had to do was keep going. Every new day you breathed, every step you took, every obstacle you overcame was a loss for them, because as long as you existed, their efforts were wasted. Every plot became pointless the moment you refused to disappear. That's what makes your survival so unbearable to them. They fought for endings, you fought for endurance. And endurance always outlasts obsession. While they were obsessed with finding ways to stop you, you were focused on something simpler and stronger, continuing. Your persistence turned into power because it stripped them of the one thing they craved most, the satisfaction of seeing you gone. What they didn't realize is that existing is the loudest rebellion when someone wants you erased. You didn't just survive, you kept growing, kept learning, kept becoming. And with every season that passed, their failure became more obvious. The longer you stayed, the weaker their story became, until eventually it collapsed under its own weight. They wanted the narrative to end with your defeat, but the fact that you're still here means their entire plot dissolved into nothing. That's why your checkmate is irreversible. Their win condition was fragile because it depended entirely on you failing. Your win condition was eternal because it only required you to keep standing. And you did. By default, the game ended in your favor, not because you played harder, but because you refused to vanish. They gambled everything on your defeat. You bet everything on your existence. And existence won. Number 13, you revealed that power is not in moves but in momentum. You revealed that power is not in moves but in momentum. That's what separated you from them in the end. They lived for flashy tactics, quick maneuvers, and clever tricks that looked impressive in the moment. They wanted the crowd to gasp at their brilliance and applaud their temporary victories, but tactics without momentum are just sparks. They flare for a second, then fade into darkness. You, on the other hand, understood that true power isn't about what you do once. It's about what keeps carrying you forward, no matter how many times you get pushed back. That's why time was always on your side. They thought setbacks were proof you were finished, but you treated every setback as fuel. Every loss gave you new insight. Every delay sharpened your patience. Every wound carved out more space for growth. What they didn't realize is that momentum isn't built on perfection, it's built on persistence. You kept moving, and with each movement, your force multiplied. While they exhausted themselves chasing single wins, you were stacking small, deliberate steps that eventually became unstoppable. Momentum is ruthless because it compounds. One move may not look like much, but repeated moves build pressure that cannot be ignored. You carried that pressure with you. By the time they realized what was happening, it was too late. The tide was already rolling in your favor. Their tactics, no matter how clever, couldn't stop the weight of what you had built. Strategy can be countered. A single move can be undone. But momentum? That's a wave no one can hold back. This is why your resilience humiliated them. They wanted quick destruction. You gave them slow, undeniable proof that nothing they did could break your forward motion. Even when you stumbled, you never stayed down long enough to stall your growth, and each return only added to your momentum, making you stronger than before. What looked like failure from the outside was really acceleration. That's why your victory is permanent. They relied on tactics, short-lived bursts of control. You relied on momentum, an ongoing force that only strengthens with time. And in the end, momentum will always outrun tactics because power isn't in the move itself, but in the unstoppable motion that follows. Every setback became your fuel, and that fuel turned you into something they could never contain. Number 14. Your victory wasn't a surprise. It was a statistic they ignored. Your victory wasn't a surprise. It was a statistic they ignored. That's the part that cuts the deepest. They thought they were playing against chance, but what they were really playing against was history, and history has always leaned toward the chosen. From the beginning of time, every system that tried to erase truth, every power that tried to crush destiny, every force that tried to bury light, ended up collapsing under its own arrogance. You were never the exception. You were the continuation of a pattern they refused to see. But arrogance has a way of blinding people. They believed their strength, their numbers, and their schemes made them untouchable. They convinced themselves they were different, that they had finally figured out a way to beat what countless others before them failed to conquer. What they didn't realize is that their downfall wasn't just possible. It was inevitable. Because when destiny has already written the outcome, human effort becomes irrelevant. They weren't fighting you. They were fighting the law of inevitability. And that's a battle no one has ever won. Your resilience, your endurance, your refusal to break, those weren't anomalies. They were signs of the statistic they ignored. Every chosen one in history has endured betrayal, opposition, and attack, but every chosen one has also risen despite it. You didn't defy the odds, you embodied them, and the fact that they overlooked this truth is why their collapse feels so brutal now. They weren't just defeated by you. They were defeated by the very arrogance that made them believe you could be erased. That's why your win carries such permanence. It wasn't luck. It wasn't a miracle. It was inevitability playing out in real time. You were always going to rise because that's what chosen ones do, and deep down, some part of them must have known it. But arrogance whispers lies. It tells people they're the exception to destiny, that they can bend the statistics in their favor. And in the end, that lie is what destroyed them. Your victory cannot be undone because it was never a gamble. It was already written into the pattern of history. They mistook inevitability for chance, and that miscalculation sealed their fate. The truth is simple. Chosen ones don't surprise history, they fulfill it, and that's exactly what you did. Every move, every pause, every act of endurance has built to this moment. You didn't just play the game they thought they controlled. You redefined it entirely. You turned silence into resonance, setbacks into fuel, and constraints into kingdoms. While they obsessed over tactics, strength, and control, you mastered time, momentum, and inevitability. Their schemes were loud, flashy, and short-lived. Yours were quiet, precise, and permanent. Every miscalculation they made, every underestimation only accelerated your rise. You proved that true power isn't about crushing opponents. It's about surviving, thriving, and shaping the story in your favor. You weren't just a player on their board. You were the variable they couldn't predict, the force they couldn't contain, the chosen one who couldn't be erased. Every attack they launched expanded your territory. Every attempt to silence you only amplified your frequency. Their victories were built on your defeat, but your existence alone dismantled their entire game. And now, the truth stands clear. Victory isn't measured in immediate applause, temporary wins, or flashy retaliation. Victory is endurance, strategy, and ownership of the story. History always leans toward the chosen, and you were no exception. Every move they thought would stop you became part of the blueprint for your rise. Every scheme they believed would define you only highlighted their own failure. This is not just a win, it's a legacy. Your rise is undeniable, unshakable, and irreversible. They can try to rewrite the narrative, smear your name, or dismiss your influence, but what has already been built cannot be undone. You didn't just survive, you thrived. You didn't just exist, you expanded. You didn't just win, you defined what victory truly means. For everyone watching this, let it be a reminder, being chosen is not about avoiding the storm, it's about learning to dance in it, turning every obstacle into opportunity, and emerging not just unbroken but unstoppable. Your story isn't a moment, it's a movement. Your victory isn't temporary, it's eternal. If this message hit you and showed the power of rising beyond limits, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss a lesson like this. Smash that like button to show you're ready to embrace your own unstoppable journey. Drop a comment below and share your story. Let the world see how you turn every challenge into your checkmate. And don't forget to share this video with someone who needs to be reminded of their own power and inevitability. Your rise is contagious. Let it spread. Stay blessed always.